everybody, it's Edie and welcome to Mixed Mediology Monday. This week's project is a sweater pumpkin, and there are a few different ways that you could actually make this pumpkin, so I figured I would take some time and talk to you about each of those before I actually start making my pumpkin. So you can see that I just have a cream colored sweater here that I picked up from the thrift store. It cost me $1. So these don't have to be expensive. However, if you don't have sweaters and if you don't want to go to the thrift store to purchase sweaters, you can do the exact same project. You can follow the exact same steps and just use regular fabric. So if you have a bunch of fabric on hand or even fabric scraps that you want to do this project with, don't feel like you have to go out and get sweaters. You can also just use your fabric that you already have on hand. Now, I have already cut the sleeves off of my sweater here because I plan on using these sleeves for another project. These are really skinny sleeves, and I didn't want itty bitty pumpkins. I wanted a larger pumpkin, so I'm going to use the sleeves for another project. The next thing that I am going to do is just open up my sweater here, and I want to cut it right across where the armpit seam is here, right there. I'm going to cut it straight across, all the way across. Let me turn this so you can see. That might be better. Okay, so I have the neck here, and you could actually, if you wanted to make smaller pumpkins, you could make a pumpkin out of the neck, which I might do. I wouldn't mind one that was that big. You can make them out of the sleeves, so you would just cut the sleeve where I've cut it kind of at an angle following the seam line. You would just cut it straight across and make your pumpkin out of this sleeve here. You would have a really tall, skinny pumpkin. Or if you're using sweaters or fabric with wider tubes, then you would have larger pumpkins. So I'm probably going to use the neck here to create one of our pumpkins, but I'm not sure yet. So what you want to do is find your armpit seam, and you're just going to cut straight across right there. So if you want a really large pumpkin like the one I'm going to do, you will just leave your sweater like this. So you have the body of the sweater here, and you'll just leave it the size that it is. If you want to make smaller pumpkins but still use the body, you'll just cut this in half. You'll cut it into two sections. So you'll cut up that seam and cut up that seam, and then you'll have two separate pieces of fabric that are this big, and then you'll stitch those into a tube. So if this was cut in half, I would then fold it here and stitch it, and then I would have a tube that was this big. But I want a giant pumpkin, so I'm just going to use the body of my sweater just as it is. Now, a couple of things that you can do are, if you like this neutral look, you can, if you are planning to do a bunch of pumpkins out of one sweater, you can tea dye some of your fabric so that you have variations in color, but yet they're all still basically the same. So you can have all neutral pumpkins yet still get them different colors with the tea dye. You could coffee dye them or whatever you wanted to do. I'm gonna leave mine just like this. You could also buy neutral colored sweaters and then use the RIT dye to dye them pretty much any color that you wanted. So for instance, if you wanted orange pumpkins but you were unable to find an orange sweater that you like, find neutral colored sweaters and then use the RIT dye to dye them the shades that you want. Okay, now let's talk about how to actually construct your pumpkin. I've seen this done a few different ways. There is one way that takes the end of the sweater here and you just bunch it up like so, and you tie it either with a rubber band or twine or, you know, yarn, thread, whatever you are using, and you, oh, I can't get the rubber band around. Okay, so we're just gonna pretend that I did that twice. I'm not doing mine like this, so it's just for show anyway. So you would tie this nice and secure. You would at least loop it twice or tie it around 3 or 4 times with some sort of ribbon, yarn, twine, something. So that what you have is one closed end and then one open end. You would flip it inside out like so. So that you see you've got your little bundle down there in the bottom. Okay? And it's closed here on the bottom. So there's your seam. This is the no-sew pumpkin. So it's closed there. At this point, you would stuff your pumpkin. So this is where you take your polyfill, your fabric scraps, your grocery bags. I've seen it done with all of those things. The leftover bits of sweater. You just stuff this with whatever stuffing you're using, and you want to try and stuff around this so that it's nice and smooth on the fabric side. So you would stuff your pumpkin until it's completely full, and then you would have a full stuffed pumpkin. I'll just put these things in here to like stuff it for now, so we can talk a little bit about how to close it up. Okay, so then you've got this stuffed pumpkin. Then you would bunch it up again up here at the top, like so. Shape it a little bit as you need to, and you would tie it with another rubber band or more twine or more yarn or more ribbon or whatever it is that you're using, and it's done. So you've got your pumpkin shape. This one's short and fat because I didn't hardly stuff it, but then you would have the top of your sweater showing here for the stem. You could also just wind it and completely cover this with twine or ribbon or yarn, whatever you're using, and there is your no-sew pumpkin. Now, I've also seen it done where it is the exact same concept, except it is a sewn pumpkin. So you would run a seam here, flip it inside out, stuff it, and then run your seam here. You would, just bunch it up and run your seam, or you could still just follow the same step and wind it with twine or whatever. So you could do those same steps with no-sew and sew. I'm actually going to be sewing my pumpkin, so I'm going to pop this on my sewing machine real quick and stitch this bottom here, and then I'll be back to show you the next step. There we go. I have my bottom seam stitched closed. Just want to trim these threads. Now, what I want to do is bunch this up a little bit. So now I'm just going to start at the end, and I'm just going to do a very loose straight stitch. I'm going right along the seam line. You want this nice and loose. Now you don't have to do this step if you don't want to fool with the extra stitch along the bottom. It's just going to give you a nice little ruched effect down at the bottom. So it'll round your pumpkin out a little bit more at the bottom. But if you're hand stitching and you've already taken a lot of time to make the seam, then you may not want to do this step. It's totally optional. You don't have to do it. I just like the way it looks. Okay, so I have stitched my seam with the sewing machine, so that one's nice and secure. Now this one is just very, very loose all the way across the bottom in the same basic place as my seam. So I've got my whole stitch run across here, and what I'm going to do is hold my thread nice and tight here and start pulling it. You see how that bunches up? If you need to, you can start at the opposite end and kind of pull it in a little bit more, so that way you can finish scrunching here at the bottom. And you want to pull it nice and tight, so what you end up with is this bunched seam right here. And the more you pull it to the opposite end, the tighter that bunched seam will be. Okay? Now, just want to pop a couple of stitches in there so that it holds. So now I'm going to flip it inside out, and it will look something like this. Your seam is nice and hidden, and you have this rouging along the bottom. All right, now the fun begins. We get to start stuffing our pumpkin. So you can see my stitched seam is inside here. I'm using polyester fiber fill. If you've never used this, it's messy. There's just no way to get around it. And you want to break it off into little sections like this so that it's a little bit more fluffy. So you just kind of pinch little bits and make it more fluffy and stuff it in there. So this is going to take a little while because I made a huge pumpkin. Remember, the more fabric you start with, the larger your pumpkin is going to be, because these sweaters are going to stretch out, and you need to keep that in mind. If you don't want a huge pumpkin, you may want to make 2 pumpkins out of the body of the sweater, because the more fabric you have, the more stuffing it's going to take, and it's just going to feel like it keeps growing and growing, because the sweater is going to stretch out as you stuff it. It's going to stretch and give. So just keep that in mind as you're stuffing your sweater and as you're cutting your fabric to begin with. So I'm just going to stuff my pumpkin, and then I will be back to show you how to close it up. Alright, I'm almost out of stuffing. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can stuff these as firm as you want. So if you want a really full, firm pumpkin, then just keep putting more stuffing in there until you feel like you just can't get any more. I have used almost a whole bag of stuffing. I will have used the whole bag by the time I'm finished with this, and I'm just not going to use any more stuffing in mine. One bag of polyfill is enough. But like, I could probably realistically get at least another half a bag or maybe a whole bag in this pumpkin and be happy with the way it looked, because then it would be really firm and plump, and it would really hold its shape very well. Okay, once you're happy with the overall shape of your pumpkin, you want to take your thread again, or embroidery floss, whichever you're using, and you want to run a straight stitch just like we did on that other seam. This time you're going to run it around the top of your pumpkin. Now, you can do this one of two ways. You can either work right up along the seam, right along the edge here, and you'll tuck your pumpkin all in like so and make another stem for it. Or you can work a little lower down and use the part that sticks up as your stem, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start probably about 2 inches down or so and just run this stitch all the way around. Oops, I think I'm off camera. Sorry. Okay, so I'm just running a straight stitch right here, and it's going to go all the way around my pumpkin like this. Okay? And you want to try and keep that stitch as straight as possible. So I'm just going to turn this here so I can see it better. Ow. Don't stab yourself. So as you get close to the end, you may find that you have to pull your thread. That's okay, that's actually what you're going to be doing anyway. So if you have to pull your thread along and tighten it up to make it all the way around, that's all right. Don't be afraid to do that. And remember, you can start back at the opposite end where your knot is in your thread and work your fabric around towards that side, which will give you more thread to work with. Okay, you want to make sure you come all the way back around to where you started and kind of overlap it just a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 stitches. And you're going to start really pulling that thread nice and tight. This is why you want to use embroidery floss, or like I used hand quilting thread. You want to make sure that you're using a really strong thread because you're going to be pulling on it really tightly and you don't want it to pop. Especially once you get to the end here, you don't want it to pop and then you have to redo the whole thing. So you want to push your stuffing in, shape your pumpkin as you go. So I'm kind of like filling in some of these little lumps and bumps, and we're getting ready to also camouflage some of those lumps and bumps with the finishing touch as well. You want to make sure that your ruffle here is out. You want to make sure you're not stitching that into place. And just pull tight, tight, tight. And you want to close that whole thing up. And I find if you kind of wrap the thread around your fingers, you can pull it better. Okay. So then what you'll end up with is this little stump here at the top, and that's actually going to be your stem. So you want to pull your thread nice and tight. And my thread is actually stopping here. This is where it's coming out at. So what I want to do is hold tight, find another spot a couple of inches away, go into my sweater a couple of the little folds there, and pull it nice and tight. And that's where I'm going to make my knot. Just tie that off and we're done. Now you could stop right here. Just shape it into your pumpkin shape. You could stop right here and have a cute little stuffed pumpkin. Or you could just go with the twine right here, or yarn, or whatever it is that you're using. Or you could do one more finishing touch, which is what I'm getting ready to do right now. But one thing that I like in these pumpkins is when they have the little definitive shapes. I like the ones better with the little lumps in them than the plain round ones like this. So I'm just using some hemp cord and an embroidery needle, and oops, I wrapped my pumpkin several times to get my length of hemp before I cut it. You want to make sure that you have enough to go around your pumpkin several times. However many bumps you want, you need to wrap it that many times, and then give yourself still like another foot of the hemp cord. Okay, so what you want to do is take your needle and push it all the way from the top to the bottom, and the thicker your pumpkin is, the harder this part is going to be. Okay, so I have my hemp cord pulled almost all the way through, but what I'm going to do is tie a pretty large knot right here in the very end of my hemp cord. This is going to be tucked inside your pumpkin, so it doesn't matter if it's an ugly knot. You want it large enough that it's not going to pop back through the sweater. Okay, now what you want to do is bring your hemp cord back up, and you're going to go right to your seam of your pumpkin, and I like to just pull it through like this first and kind of get that double layer of hemp through the sweater. And then again, you're just going to go right back through the center, all the way down to the bottom. Now, once you get your hemp cord pulled where you want it, you want to line up your thread there and set it where you want it to be. Then you want to pull it nice and snug. And wrap it again. And it helps to kind of go across, directly across and back in. And you just want to repeat that over and over until you have all of your little bumps where you want them to be. Alright, I'm working on my last little bubble here, and I like the look of 8 bumps, but you kind of have to just play with it and see what you like. I like 8, so whenever I measured my hemp cord, I wrapped it around my pumpkin 8 times to be sure I would have enough. Okay, so I'm on my last one. I'm just going to take it right back through like I have been every other time. And if you need to, you can use a pair of pliers to pull your needle through. Pull that nice and snug. Check your pumpkin, make sure it's the way you want it to look. And now I'm going to bring this back out. Okay, now I just want to tie this off. I'm going to bring it inside to do that. So bring it back through. And then knot it off. Okay, so now you can be finished right here and have your pumpkin. It doesn't matter if the bottom looks ugly, if your stitches didn't come out of the exact same spot. It doesn't matter because that's going to be on the bottom. It's not going to be seen anyway. So you could be finished right here, or you could wrap the little stem in twine or ribbon or whatever you like. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I think I'm going to work on mine a little bit more, and then I might try to make something with the sleeves that were left over from the sweater. Thanks so much for being here. I really hope you enjoyed this project. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below and I will answer that for you. Please share what I do. If you like it, if you enjoy it, pass it along, tell your friends all about it so that they can join in on the fun as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, because the more of you that like what I do, the more projects I want to do for you. So share it on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, all those places, and tell everybody you know. You can find me on Pinterest and Facebook, as well as right here at YouTube and on Twitter. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Mwah. Bye!